Hello students, we'll now come to this last section of critical regionalism in Indian architecture as of now, and then we will move on to other presentations discussing what happened around with regard to structures and post 1990s. And then again, when we come back to the very fag end of our study of modern Indian architecture, we'll look at the latest works being done under critical regionalism by some of the young architects and firms today. So we will conclude with that there, but today we move on from here. As I told you, that critical regionalism is a fusion of modernism with the regional identity or regional architectural identity of a region. And one of the reasons why it is done is because architects realize that we must take advantage of the climate to make our buildings thermally comfortable, for example, to be comfortable from within, because we could not afford the high level of air conditioning or heating or cooling required for these buildings. And these were big building projects post-independence. So that is why they had to rely on passive techniques that were learned over a period of centuries by the people living in that region of India, and they then took those principles and adopted them in a modern context in their buildings. Because of this adoption being done, they had to do a lot of hard work in the overall planning and design of the building, because other issues also came in, things like views, which is very important in this particular project, the use of the site topography, the use of the site's climatic, the climate of the region, and even to the extent of the socio-cultural value systems of the people. They did not neglect any of these aspects in designing a holistic building, which is a modern Indian building. I will never get tired of saying this again and again. If I have to see a modern Indian building, these are the buildings I'll be looking at, or the buildings that are being built by younger Indian architects today who are taking cognizance of these very facts when they design their buildings. It is so easy to design a very fabulously looking glass and steel or RCCN glass building, which is has a lot of fascinating and amazing material all around it and a lot of fantastic cladding on it, and the views are being created because there is glass all around it and there are a large number of levels in the corporate office, etc. But the plan has not really been worked upon industriously to be able to respond to the outdoor climate. But like I have told you earlier, this cannot go on for long, because now we've got markers. We have to reduce our carbon emissions to nearly by half by 2030 and become completely carbon neutral by 2070. Therefore, those architects who were getting away by designing gas guzzling buildings cannot do so anymore, or they are depending on the idea of clean energy, which is true. Tomorrow will be the world of clean energy, and our buildings, our industries, our infrastructure will be powered by clean energy. There is no doubt about it. But why not be a part of the solution and design buildings that are sound when it comes to this aspect of building design, that is sustainability, and while doing so come up with a building that is also beautiful and good looking. So here we have the Bharat Bhavan from Charles Correa, 1975 to 81. This is basically a subterranean structure where the art center is designed as a series of sunken courtyards with a series of terrace gardens. It is built into a hillside. So here again, topography is playing a role. You're not going to flatten it out and make it neutral. He will play with the hillside, and thus he will expand the amount of work he has to do to play with that. Because he will have to bring in levels in his building. He will have to create that kind, the site and the view of the Bhopal Lake, as you see here in this picture out there in the distance, is going to govern the design of the Bharat Bhavan. He is not coming to the site with an imaginary Bhavan in mind. He is coming to the site and then imagining the Bhavan that will fit onto this site. Am I speaking the language of Frank Lloyd Wright? Am I not saying the house must be not on the hill but off the hill? That the building must respond to its location, its topography, its climate, its vegetation, its available materials. My design should not be a preconceived hypothesis. My design should be a result of the existing conditions that I see as and when I go see the site and study the conditions of that region. Then should the image of the design start floating in front of me. There is no doubt that all architects have some general idea of the building they want to do when they start thinking about it. But it must be greatly tempered by all these conditions. And thus it was tempered. Bharat Bhavan is an iconic building, a building which is so low-key that it really doesn't even have a proper elevation. I've been trying to find one shot that would define it as the elevation of the building. It doesn't exist. It is just a series of levels that are interconnected. There are sunken courtyards and terraces. That's all there is. And within that, the entire Bharat Bhavan has been put together. Beautifully done. There are a couple of more projects which we reflected on earlier of Charles Correa, and you can look at them too. They are the predecessors of this project. Now here we have this built into a hillside with slopes gently down towards the lake, and thus a series of terraces and courtyards were set up. So upon entering, the visitor has a choice. He can either follow the path of the terraces and which are cascading down towards the lake, or he can descend into the courtyards and get access to majority of the cultural facilities, the art galleries, the museum, the auditorium, the library, the print shop and the studio. This is a picture of one of the art galleries. Sunken. The natural contours of the site were used to create these terraced gardens and sunken courtyards. So this is a terraced garden and you look down into a sunken courtyard. Now when we look at the subterranean structure of sunken courtyards and a sunken amphitheatre, in the section, this is the showing of the sunken courtyard. These are the terraces that you will be following as you go down towards the lake. And then here in plan, these are the courtyards and this is the amphitheatre. So these are the sunken courtyards that you see on site, and this is the amphitheatre with the play going on, and the amphitheatre is looking towards the lake. It's at the bottom of the site with open air performances taking place, with the lake forming the backdrop, the formal backdrop or the natural backdrop. These are the galleries which are a part of the which open up from the sunken courtyards. And then also the idea of the ritualistic pathway. If you go back to some of my lectures, some previous lecture where I talked of the ritualistic pathway, where Charles Correa is using the pathway movement of a temple or a palace or even a village, that ritualistic movement to create the movement within his building. I've talked of an earlier museum by him where he had used the ritualistic pathway. Here also it happens. The pathway here is through terraces, encouraging the movement of people along the natural gradient of the site, and courtyards on the way provide as relaxing areas. They are tranquil spaces where you can just sit down and rest and relax. So Correa's design is modern. It's a modern architectural style specific to India, distinct from a modernism which is for Europe. This is modernism which is for India. It is drawing from India's rich architectural heritage. Therefore, Bharat Bhavan is a modern building which is rooted in India's past vernacular traditions. The traditions of open spaces, courtyards and terraces, the chhat and the angan, all playing their role in putting this building together. It is well suited for the needs of contemporary society, which has got familiar architectural motifs that respond to the man of the 80s, but he also took significant steps in his goal to create a very distinct Indian modernism. These are some of the buildings of Charles Correa. This is the consulate building he did in New York. This I have studied with you. This is in Mauritius. This is in Bangalore. This is LIC Delhi. And this is the Gandhi Samarak Sangrahalaya. But the important thing are these points. European modernism and Corbusier were heavily influenced modern architecture in India for much of the 20th century. Correa was very alert towards this trend. He criticized the Palace of Assembly for being poorly ventilated, insufficiently lit, and wholly unsuitable for India's hot and humid climate, or in that case, composite climate. Conversely, Correa's architecture is shaped by the climate, by the environment. Climate control is of primary concern to him in his design process, often a necessity. As much of his early work consisted of projects for squatter settlements or squatter housing, where inhabitants have no way to pay for high expensive air conditioning and are forced to rely on the building itself to regulate the indoor temperature. This is not an idea that restricted him only to squatter development. Whether he designed the Ramakrishna house or the Parekh house for the rich people, whether he designed Kanjanaga apartments for the high income group people, he resorted to the same passive techniques to make the houses thermally comfortable without dependence on air conditioning. Was air conditioning dependent upon? I believe so, but not to the extent it would have been required had the principles not been applied. Now, rather than importing sealed boxes of European architecture, which has been necessitated by the Western colder climate, Correa instead wanted to create these open to sky spaces so vital in India. I do not know whether the young generation gets to see these open to sky spaces in the upcoming urban centers of India, but when I was growing up, when I saw Delhi and other places, I saw so many open to sky spaces were deliberately created. It was a part of our lifestyle to spend the evenings outdoors in summers and even in winters, of course. When you go out to play in the Maidan or the ground or whatever city afforded whatever green space, and much of the family life was spent in the veranda or on the terrace or in the Maidan in either early mornings or late evenings in summers. And in winters also, there are specific times when we could spend time in the outdoors. He observed that in warm climate, the best place to be in late evenings and early mornings is under the open sky. Sunken courtyards, as you see in the Bharat Bhavan, provide shade from the scorching midday sun, while the raised terraces offer refreshing air and space at cooler times of the day. Exactly what they were supposed to do in the various mohallas and gullies of, for example, Delhi or the older part of Delhi, where the chhat was the place where people used to sleep at night. This climate control solution for India's architectural history was inspired by the courtyards and terraces we find even in the Red Fort. So when we go to the Red Fort, we find the same thing happening. We find terraces, we find courtyards, we find all these spaces being brought in here because this was the vernacular response to the climatic conditions of the region. Now, Correa says there is nothing so moving as stepping out into an open to sky space and feeling the great arch of the sky or looking out towards the horizon. At Bharat Bhavan, it is intended that those emerging into the courtyard undergo the similar dramatic spatial experience of coming outdoors and being able to see the arch of the sky, particularly as the sun sets in the late evening. The subterranean structures not only just confined to being symbols of passive comfort or the kind of spaces that were derived because of the existing topography, which he allowed it to continue in the manner, but also because of using the mandala form in creating these sunken courts. The sky even incorporated into the interior spaces of the site. So trying to pull in daylight into the deep interior areas by these concrete shells that you see here, for example. These concrete shells placed over the terraces, and they allow light to filter into the deep areas. From the exterior, these shells are actually a reinterpretation of the Rajasthani chhatri, right? The only thing is this got an oculus, an eyepiece to pull the light in. So what we have for light and ventilation within the building by top lights from the concrete shells, and then top lights, and then there are these small cavities provided, slots provided along the parapets of the terrace, which also take in light deep inside the building below. Now, light and ventilation, the idea of bringing in light using these concrete shells in Bharat Bhavan actually came from an earlier project, maybe about 5-7 years earlier, the Salvakau church he did in Mumbai, where again he used a raw concrete finish, concrete shell, and he used a stained glass dome to pull in light into the Salvakau church. He used the same idea in the Bharat Bhavan and brings light into the interiors. This is the Salvakau church concrete shell, and these are the shells of the Bharat Bhavan. So from the courtyards, there are these wide glass panelled openings to ensure that the arts program displayed inside is accessible to all. Just move in. The next project is on the other side of the climate spectrum. From composite, we are going to cold climate of Kashmir, and we have the Kashmir Conference Center by Joseph Allen Stein in 1984. This conference facility with a 325-room hotel is adjoining the Dal Lake. In that case, the project was adjoining the Bhopal Lake. This is adjoining the Dal Lake. In cooler climates, so the cold climates of Himalayas, the building has been stripped of all sun screening textures because we want the sun to penetrate the building. It is a very lean and elegant in the mountain light when we see. It is made of exposed concrete or concrete block construction instead of bricks, which are not readily available in the mountains, but rocks are. And that is the availability of the material, and the surrounding landscape responds to this kind of material. Now, the formal Mughal gardens, we have the Naushad Gardens of Srinagar here itself. The formal Mughal gardens of Kashmir are a guideline for a sensitive intervention. But here again, he does not imitate them ad verbatim. What he does is to bring in maximum sun into the building, something that probably Charles Correa or somebody else wouldn't have done in a composite situation. He gives extensive glazing. He gives a delicately trabeated concrete structure, and he gives maximum transparency, all to pull in as much sun into the building as possible. So whereas in composite climate, they were trying to keep out the sun and the glare as much as possible. Climate changes, conditions change, building changes, it's to pull in the sun, right? Had it been an actively controlled building, I can say for sure the same building design of an active controlled building in Delhi could have worked equally well in Kashmir. The only difference being from conditioning air for cooling, you can convert that to conditioning for heating. These are the gabled guest wings to respond to the topography, the form of the mountains, the hills behind. Then we have this amazing composition of in Brutalism called the NDDB office building by A.P. Kanvinde in 1983. This is brutalist, but it is finished with white cement and rugged stone marble chip work. But it is brutalist because it is rough cast work. It is an asymmetrical massing of blocks with receding irregular terraces as we go up. And the comparison of this brutalist work can be made with Montreal 67, the project of Moshe Safdie, the housing project that he did, which also had the series of blocks placed asymmetrically over the entire composition. This is an alternative to conventional office planning, The emphasis is on office worker amenities and an environmentally sensitive workspace. More exclusive functions than that of the chairman, the director office, etc. are provided right at the top. The larger public spaces, including reception, etc., are on the lower floors, and the exterior is rough plaster of marble chips and white cement. The vertical services that are provided at the back of the building are kept separate, the fire escape, the main stairs, the elevator towers. So the served spaces and the servant spaces are clearly defined. If you look at the plan, for example, this is isometric here, you can see that these are the servant spaces and these are the served spaces here. So the ideology of Kahan of servant and served spaces also comes into play in this building. Irregular terraces with hanging gardens have been provided, as you can see here in this picture. These are the various hanging gardens of the irregular terraces. This is the view from above, as you can see these gardens. Now this same idea of hanging gardens was later applied in 1997 by Norman Foster in Commerce Bank, where he called them sky gardens. They were not so randomly organized. In this case, they are more asymmetrically, more randomly organized. In the case of the Commerce Bank building, they were more symmetrically organized, but we have these sky gardens all the way up the Commerce Bank building. I am not saying that he borrowed the idea from NDDB building. I am saying that NDDB building, the Commerce Bank and several others are a same chain of buildings who continue to apply vegetation even at higher levels. The idea of green roofs today or gardens at high levels is all, these buildings are all a precursor to an idea that has now been firmly enshrined in our definition of what entails, what makes a green building. Then we come to the Institute of Forest Management in Bhopal by Anant Raje in 1989. We are very close to the start of liberalization in India, and Anant Raje himself is one of the most talked about modern Indian architects, a guru to several leading designers, a great educator. Young generations get to know Raje through his buildings, the most prominent being the Indian Institute of Forest Management in Bhopal. So we have projects connected with housing. This is the MDC, the Management Development Center in IIM Ahmedabad. This is the IAFM. Then there are other projects done by him in different places. So here again, the site plays an important role. It is not leveled out, it is not neutralized, but used. It's a rocky site overlooking the Bhopal Lake again, as in the case of Bharat Bhavan. It is a combination of building and landscape. Dense congregation of structures are creating sequences of semi-enclosed and open to sky spaces. They are intimate in scale, the sun-protected extension of the architectural environment. It is a large government project, as is Bharat Bhavan, as is the Kashmir Conference Center, and as is to a certain extent the NDDB building is also sponsored by the government. In this case, monumentality has a deep, there is monumentality, but we see an overall deep impact of Kahan, for example, in the element like this or in the arches like this, all reminding us of Louis I. Kahn's IIM Ahmedabad. It is but got a richer architectural language, idiom, as compared to Anant Raje's Management Development Center that I have taught you earlier, because this expands beyond just exposed brickwork to play with stone. There is the idea of the palimpsest, there is the idea of the datum, there is the idea of the way the forms have been created with very light, there's a lightness of form that he generates instead of the heavy block massing that he used earlier in the MDC. The facilities are related to teaching, seminars, residences and recreation, and is set to promote ecologically sound program for forestry. Being so, it is needed that the building itself has an ecological responsiveness. The plan is resolved into distinct components. Some are repeated, some are tilted off the grid and are distinguished by their own geometry. For example, this one. There is a linear reflecting pool, as you see here. There is a linear reflecting pool which is bordering the complex, and it serves as a datum to the entire composition. Now, what is a datum? A datum is a recurring reference system against which all the elements can be arranged. It's like, example, you can draw a straight line, and then all the elements that you arrange in a project are aligned with this in some way or another. So that serves as a kind of a reference system for aligning spaces together. In this case, this water body, which has other functions also, serves as a datum also. There is high regard in Kahn's work in the use of arched forms and related patterns of solids and voids and light and darkness, coming from where? Straight from Louis Kahn. So we have this. A historical influence is also there in IIFM Bhopal, and that is of the ruins of Mandu, which are nearby. And what does he gather from the ruins of the palaces of Mandu? Raje translated the ruins into contemporary structure, which were more delicate in mass and proportion vis-a-vis the Mandu palaces, but characterized by bony, haunted quality of the ruin is there. This haunting quality of this grey stonework of the palace at Mandu is getting reflected here along the datum line in these buildings that are placed here. Inside and outside, light and darkness is also a reminder of IIM Ahmedabad. Interiors interact with exteriors through these concrete arched skin, this one. But this skin suggests lightness of form. It sits very lightly along the periphery of the block, giving the overall building this sense of lightness of form. The building looks bare bones, thin plates, thin members. And not only that, the way the sun filters in from the round openings at the top. So, intimate courts are there, exposed materials are there, entrance gate is there. And let us take, for example, all these points in one building. The mess building, we have the lightness of form, the monumentality, the exposed materials, the play of water, and Kahn's arches all coming together. These are some of the other images of IIFM Ahmedabad, Bhopal. You can again see the lightness of form, how delicately this concrete panel has been supplanted over this, the beam below it, and these. So we have essentially seen a series of iconic projects, but there are so many more. There's no end to the amazing work done by many architects. Some other important projects that you can study in more detail are the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore by B.V. Doshi, light and shade and use of raw concrete with exposed stonework and greens and blues, and an amazing mix of complex of spaces, so rich in their architectural language. We can look at that. This is IIM Bangalore and the greens of IIM Bangalore, the shaded areas. And then there is the India Habitat Center in New Delhi by Joseph Allen Stein, 1993. In fact, the interlinked shaded courtyards of Fatehpur Sikri and that of India Habitat Center relate to each other. If this is the Fatehpur Sikri interlocking building blocks, so these are the building blocks that you find in the India Habitat Center. And these are the various views of this amazingly beautiful exposed brick and concrete construction with that massive court in between, monumental in height, human scaled because of the series of floors on either side, very similar to the idea that he tried in Ford Foundation. It is covered with this amazing louver at the top, and the entire space comes alive even in the daytime, even when it's hot, because of the greens and blues implanted in that court area. These are the interior spaces of the India Habitat Center in Delhi. So I'll close here that we have covered a huge range of buildings of various architects and how they responded to the context of critical regionalism. I do hope that this will have opened up a direction for you to look and search for more. There are many, many more. And there will be a few more that I will teach you at the end of this series, when I will look at the work of the latest younger architects, firms like Morphogenesis and maybe Total Environment, Rahul Mehrotra and Sanjay Puri. We'll look at some of their works. But for the time being, do this much. Start studying and exploring on your own. We have given you the guidelines, we have given you the pointers. Please start joining them together to get the complete picture. Thank you so much for today.